Uh,
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Prevention Exchange. We really appreciate your time and your energy spent with us today. I'm going to hand this over to Jen Morrell to do our intro.
Hi there, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you again for joining us today at our Prevention Exchange. My name is Jen Morrell. I serve as the Managing Director for the Ohio Center of Excellence for Behavioral Health Prevention and Promotion. And we are so excited to spend the next hour with you, just creating a space to talk about our own professional goals, resources to help each of us climb the career ladder. I know for me personally, December, January, February is when I start reflecting about how I want to intentionally spend the next 365 days, both in my personal life and then, of course, in my professional life. And certainly my organization, we start putting those goals to paper in the next couple of weeks. So we are so excited to bring a wealth of experience and expertise to our panel discussion today. I'd like to introduce our moderator extraordinaire, Tessa Miracle with the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation. Tessa is a research scientist with the organization. We also have on our panel joining us today, Christy Valentini-Lackner, who is a Chief Program Officer with Prevention First in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then Jamie Belcher, who is a health educator for the Sandusky County Public Health Department, and also serves as the ATOD Committee Coordinator for their partnership, Prevention Partnership Coalition. They're going to be sharing some expertise and helping us set the stage for what hopes to be a fruitful conversation. Really, the goal of our Prevention Exchange is to really just have an informal conversation around this month's topic. So we invite you all to take notes as our panelists are sharing some of their ideas. We'll have an opportunity to ask them and have more of a dialogue as a group a little bit later in the hour. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tessa to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen. And again, thank you everyone for spending your time with us today. I do want to invite both of our panelists to share a brief introduction and really share a little bit about their professional experience and their experience on the prevention career ladder. So Christy, let's start with you.
So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Jen and Tessa, for letting me hang out with all of you. One of these days, I'm just going to not talk. I'm sure you're all sick of me by now, but until that day comes, I just love being with all of you. So I come to you with my CPO hat as a supervisor over here at Prevention First, but I also come to you as one of the administrators for the Ohio Coaching and Mentor Network that helps build capacity throughout the state. And it is funded because of Dr. Thomas's just devotion and excitement and engagement around this work. And so I think that while I have a little bit of a traditional path in prevention, I started with direct service, I moved into directing a coalition, and I moved over to an agency that did less direct service and more kind of that training and technical assistance. And now I do supervise staff. I do really encourage, and I think we'll get into this later, everybody to, and I'll say this multiple times, choose your own path in prevention. And I think another reason why I get invited to these tables is that I'm very open with my very unique path to get my certification. So I am lucky to be in this field for 20 plus years. And when I first sat for the test for what was then the one, I consider myself a pretty, decent student, but it took me some time to pass that, right? These were in the days where we had to drive to Columbus and sit in a room with like 250 people and a pencil, and I was easily distracted by all the sounds and around me. But then I let it lapse. right? Because that's the kind of person I am, right? And then came back and took the test as a computer on a computer, and then moved my way through the C. So I think I can bring some real life experience on the challenges that we have when we're A, moving through this field, and B, moving through the process of getting credentialed. So happy to share all of that and happy to be here with all of you.
Thank you so much, Christy. Jamie, I would invite you to introduce yourself and share a little bit more about your experience and your role.
Hi, my name is Janie Rhodes, and I am the Assistant Director of Coaching for OCUS, which is the state training manager. And I'm developing a program that's really geared toward transfer of learning implementation where the rubber meets the road. I've been in child welfare for the last, or child protection for the last 35 years. Most recently, I was supervising in a small county that's very underserved. I am very dialed in and interested in evidence-based, trauma-informed services coming to those very underserved areas. So I've been following progress, and I am here to listen and learn what you guys are doing. I'm really excited about it, and I'm excited to share that with my colleagues as well. So
Thank you, Janie. I appreciate that. And I'm so glad you could join us today for Prevention Exchange.
thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you. Jamie, could you please share a little bit about your role and your work experience, Jamie?
Yeah, so thank you again for having me today. I started in the field of prevention as a youth, involved in youth-led prevention as a middle school student. So 7th grade, I was invited to a youth-led group, fell in love with prevention, attended some conferences, decided that's what I wanted to do. That's really where my heart was. So I got a degree in community health and social work. So I have an associate's in social work because I knew I could do prevention as a social worker. And then I found out when I got my bachelor's that I could do community health, which is prevention, but a little different. So that's kind of my educational background. So I got out of college with my degree. I got hired at a community mental health agency doing community-based prevention. So a lot of school-based youth-led prevention. I was there for about 9.5 years. Again, a lot of direct service. And then I kind of switched roles. I'm now at a health department running some tobacco work in our coalition. So not as much direct service, a little bit more environmental policy change oriented. But I am an OCPC, so I did start with RA. I also tested as a 1, Christy, and then I became a 2, and then they changed it to a C. So we've been around for that process. I work on multiple grants here, and one of those is a mentoring grant. So we are actually mentoring 3 other counties in their prevention coalitions and getting individuals credentialed. So I do also provide that technical assistance with the prevention credential process. And one of the things that I know we'll get to is that I did work through a grant to create a prevention career ladder that kind of explains prevention as a holistic process within the community, right? It's a multifaceted approach, how prevention is done by many, many people within the community, whether they know it or not, and kind of how that credentialing process works. So.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing a bit about your journey into prevention. I get it. I think, all of us kind of have our own adventure within prevention. It really does feel like a choose your own adventure instead of book, like career ladder, where you get to choose different places. And I completely agree. When I tested for the 1. So I remember that experience. I remember what it was like. So thank you for reminding me how our name has changed a little bit. One thing that, stood out in my mind as you were both talking about your different roles in prevention. So we talked about youth-led, we were talking about, entering this space, maybe, life changes, lapsing, coming back in. I know that, one of the unspoken supports during that time was supervision. and that sort of support. So, you know, supervision and prevention has multiple meanings, so it can mean different things. This can refer to our supervision of prevention services. It can be supervision of your employer. I would like to talk a little bit more about the nuance of supervision and prevention. And that was a theme, you know, that the team has shared in our discussions preparing for this call. So Christy, I would love to hand this over to you and hear a little bit more about, you know, your supervisor in prevention. Is that, you know, always the person who, you know, approves your PTO? Like, what does that look like? And let's talk about some of the nuance around that.
Yeah, I think, you know, Jamie and I both agree that this is probably one of the first questions that we ask someone when they are coming to us wanting to go through the credential process. Because I think there are a lot of us out working in the field of prevention that come from all different sorts of agencies, organizations, sectors, parts of the community that don't necessarily have the supervision that can sign off on the paperwork, right? So let's just talk about the paperwork when it comes to becoming that registered applicant. And I got to say this, that registered applicant is so important because that puts you under the scope of practice so that you can start collecting practical hours. So those of you that are supervisors or are planning on being our supervisors or in charge of volunteers, the moment you get that new person into your space, have them fill out that registered applicant professional development plan, right? So real quickly, just to refresh all of us, to remind all of us, to put us all on the same page, the person who's going to sign off on your credential paperwork needs to be either an OCPC, an OCPS, they can be a doctor, right? They can be a licensed psychologist. They can be a registered nurse, a professional counselor, clinical counselor, professional counselor, independent social worker, independent marriage and family therapist, licensed under Chapter 4751, school counselor or health educator, right? And I want to go back to that health educator real quick. I know some people push back in the field and say, well, I have my CHES, right? Do I just automatically get grandfathered into it? And I want to say, fantastic. I mean, that's a lot of work you put in to get that. That's awesome, right? But you got to do the process to get those additional letters after your name. You can't just use the CHES to get the prevention credential, right? So you have those individuals that can sign off, but those individuals might not be your direct supervisor, right? Your direct supervisor, and I think Jamie's going to speak on this a little bit more, might not know a whole lot about the world of prevention. So Jamie, myself, all of us that are mentoring and helping you work through this process, we're going to try to look at your organization. We're going to try to look at your board. We're going to try to look at your community members and see if there's somebody who can supervise this credential process and work with your supervisor that's doing your, like Tessa said, your PTO, your benefits, your timesheets, your day-to-day work, right? That being said, and again, I want to lay that red carpet for Jamie. You know, it would be wonderful if your supervisor who may not have any of those letters behind their name could learn a little bit more about prevention, right? That's only going to support their role. I love what Jamie says. Everybody does prevention, right? Everybody does prevention. It's going to help you grow. It's going to help them grow, right? So, you know, we would still kind of encourage them to maybe walk this path to the credential process with you. The other thing I would have to say is that, you know, sometimes it can feel like this is a huge barrier. I know in the field of prevention, we are trying to work on building more OCPCs, right? We are trying to grow that particular group of individuals. We are trying to grow the field of SSs because SSs can supervise as well, SAs, other SSs, although we can talk a little bit about that later too, RAs. So we hear what you're saying. We hear that there's a lack of, you know, resources with supervision, and we will do our best. We're doing our best to grow both, you know, those that are in that RA process, those that are SAs, those that are SS, and those that are Cs. So I threw kind of a lot out there. I think I'm going to pause there. Tess, I think we're going to hand it off to Jamie and then maybe do questions, right?
Yeah, we can hand it off to Jamie and do questions in a moment, but I do want to just hold space because I know we threw some acronyms out there and we threw some, you know, some very specific pieces of prevention. And I just want to hold space for, any questions around, what Christy just shared. So I do see a question in the chat, Christy. I don't know if you saw it, but for those of you who don't have the chat open, so Ches and those other outside credentials you just listed can sign off, but not provide services themselves.
Isn't that so fascinating and interesting? It's also one of those ones where like an S can supervise another S, they can supervise each other, and then Cs don't need any supervision at all, right? And I often say, if you're a C, you still need supervision, right? You might just go to your other fellow Cs. So there are those nuances. And sometimes I talk about how we had to build the field and we didn't have a lot of individuals that could supervise, right? So the long answer that I just gave you was, yeah, you're right. The short answer is, if you are delivering services that fall within the scope of prevention, ethically, you should have your one scope of practice, whatever scope of practice you're doing, credential in that prevention field. So absolutely. Excellent questions, Sasha. Thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. And I do see that Jen has gone ahead and launched our poll. So thank you so much for folks who have answered. Before we move on to Jamie's portion of this segment, we really want to get a feel for your experience with your I guess we can think of like a traditional supervisor, that person who supervises you in the workplace, who may overlap with your prevention supervisor, but realistically is that person who's like signing off on PTO and things like that. We would love to hear about your experience with that individual and their level, your perception of their level of experience with prevention, especially as Jamie is going to frame what our role can look like when our supervisor maybe is one of those people who doesn't have as much experience with prevention, and just making sure we are communicating in a way that not only shares the knowledge that we have, but creates an environment where that person can learn and also provide opportunities for us. So Jamie, it looks like, we've got it's lovely. We've got about 14% of folks say my supervisor has no experience with prevention. That starts to trend up as we go up categories. Almost 40% report that their supervisor has some experience with prevention, while almost half say my supervisor has a lot of experience with prevention. So it's lovely to hear that this group is a group where almost half of you have support of a supervisor with a lot of experience in prevention. Jamie, I do want to hand it over to you to share a little bit of your insight on, how supervisors don't always come equipped with working knowledge of prevention and what that can look like and how we can be supportive.
Yeah, so in my previous position, I was a prevention staff of one. It was me. I did everything. And so I had 3 different supervisors, actually probably 5 over the years if we're counting everyone that I reported to, that had 0 prevention knowledge. So they would come in and say, "Hey, what should we do for this?" Or they would try to like supervise me, and they'd be like, "But I don't understand what you do." And as frustrating as that could be, I had the opportunity to use that to teach them about what I did. We would talk about the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, the CSAP strategies. I would talk about our programming and why it's evidence-based. And we would look at that. Now, I did have the credentials to supervise myself, technically as a C, but through our kind of organizational chart, I had to report to someone. By the time they started using prevention acronyms, they left for a different position, and I would start all over. And I'd be like, "But you knew what I meant when I used these 3 letters together." But again, it was those learning opportunities to be able to share with them what I was doing. But I was experienced in prevention. For those of you who are new, inviting your supervisor to learn alongside you is huge. I know supervisors are busy, but there's so many different virtual options out there that you can have your supervisor sit in on with you, or to listen with you. That's huge. For those of you who have supervisors with prevention experience, it's also important to remember that prevention science is ever evolving, right? What I did for youth-led prevention in high school is very different right, than youth-led prevention science today. You know, we were doing mock car crashes back in the early 2000s. We were doing Grim Reaper. We were doing all these things that we know are scare tactics and ineffective now. So, you know, depending on how much experience and how much involvement your supervisor has in the day-to-day in direct service, you know, really helping them understand how prevention science is changing and evolving, so that they're not maybe stuck 5, 10, 15 years ago with what used to be appropriate prevention science, which we now know is not effective prevention science.
Absolutely, Jamie. Thank you for upholding the learning from the science. So science is a process and we are learning every day what works better. And I completely agree with you. I went to a high school with a mock car accident and they've grown and changed since then. And what an opportunity to engage our leadership and show that, you know, the science is evolving. I do want to uphold a couple of comments in the chat. So the first thing I want to lift up is Barbara Adams has brought up the issue of supervision and prevention is under discussion and review by the prevention committee of the credentialing board. The committee welcomes comments or input from the field. You can send them directly to Jill Smock or Jim Ryan, and I will drop contact information for both of those in the chat in just a moment. And Christy, there was a specific request, and I know you saw it, so I wanted to hold space before I move on to our questions for our panelists for you to address the comment.
Yeah, so the comment in the box was around in the Ohio Revised Code, can you practice with the CHES or licensed social worker without your prevention credential? And so this is a little complicated, right? While I wish I could give a clean answer to this, it really does come down to what is your scope of practice? Who is your funder, right? Who is in partnership in the work that you're doing? Who is your supervision? And so it gets a little muddied, right? And so what we kind of have just as a OCHIM network have suggested is, listen, my hope is, you know, before I leave this week work, that there will be universities that have a 100% prevention degree, right? But because we're coming from all different areas with all different degrees and backgrounds, it helps that we have this credential that gives us legitimacy to the field that we're doing, helps us all understand the language, the work, the ever-changing research and data that Jamie just mentioned that's so important, right? And so while I think we can talk about how there is definitely prevention in the social work degree that we have, definitely prevention in the the public health information we have, we still are missing components that as a field we're coming together to make sure that you are well-rounded and which is why we have the domains, why we are so specific on the scope of practice and who's supervising, which was a long, really muddled way to say there's no yes or no to that when it comes to, and Jamie, help me clarify that a little bit better.
Yeah, so the Ohio Revised Code does state that certain credentials, aside from prevention, can provide prevention services. And Christy is correct. And it really depends on what are your funders' requirements. I'm a CHES as well, right? But I have taken classes in diabetes and other things. So although I'm knowledgeable as a CHES, and the areas of responsibility very much line up with the domains in lots of ways, that doesn't mean I have the exact training in true prevention science and what that looks like. The other thing to take into consideration goes back to that scope of practice, right? Getting your registered applicant or your RA gives you a specific prevention scope of practice. Having your OCPSA, your specialist assistant, gives you a very specific scope of practice. And then those also align with our prevention ethics. Yes, there are specific prevention ethics. They're different than the NASW Code of Ethics. They're different than your treatment code of ethics because prevention is different. So although you can practice prevention with certain things, that doesn't mean that you have the ability to be the best you can be, because you may not have all of the exact prevention knowledge and resources and scope of practice at your fingertips, if that makes any sense.
Oh, Jamie, that was so well said. Applaud, Jamie. and Jamie, I want to circle back to something you said also too, because I think COVID showed us this too. Sometimes because of funding, because of boards, because where we are in the state, we are super focused on one domain, super focused on one service delivery, right? And I think what COVID showed us as we can't just be prevention specialists that just do one thing, right? We need that whole scope, all of those domains, so we're well-rounded, so we understand how, if our school shut down, we can still deliver quality prevention with environmental strategies and a virtual world, and still build those relationships and still build prevention. And we have those skills. And when we go through that RA process, just like Jamie said, we are under that scope of practice, we're learning those domains, and we are forcing ourselves to grow outside maybe one box that we are, for whatever reason, really hyper-focused on. And so I think, it is our job as a field to continue to grow our skills, to continue to be able to say, I can do prevention in multiple sectors across multiple lifespans. I may be really, really good here and I like it here. But when people approach me, whether it's, the media or a stakeholder, I can really adapt that to across the spectrum and across the sectors. So there's so much going on, ethics, funders, ability to really understand the nuances of the work that we're doing. And I'm going to mute myself now because I know there's lots of other stuff we're going to talk about.
Oh my goodness, Christy. No, there is never a requirement that you mute yourself. And I thank you both for sort of jumping, being able to build upon what the other one is sharing and taking the comments from the chat and building and expanding in a way that is meaningful and, clarifies some areas of confusion. I fully recognize that, sometimes in our day-to-day work, we don't have time to sit down and read these codes and read the guidelines. We're pretty focused on getting our boots on the ground. So I appreciate you bringing that up. We do have a couple of questions for our panelists, and I would really like to spend a little time, now that we have a better understanding of some of the unique supervision needs. We just have a couple of questions, really looking at supervision. And I know we've kind of segued into, who's doing what in prevention and what does it mean to have this credential versus other credentials. But I want to uphold just a little bit of information around supporting our supervisors who either have a credential or don't have a credential. So let's start there. So how can that supervisor who doesn't hold a credential effectively and meaningfully manage prevention professionals in a way that fosters growth and professional development is one of the questions we developed.
Okay, I'm going to jump in first here, Christy. Sorry to jump in, but I've been in this situation before, like I said, and now I'm in a different situation with a team of prevention professionals. We all work together, but I have been in situations where my supervisors, they weren't super knowledgeable about prevention until I educated them, but they also, as much as they wanted to help me in my growth, they didn't have the ability as a one-woman team, but also because of company policy, I could not belong to professional organizations like the Ohio Prevention Professionals. I also was not able to attend things like the Ohio Prevention Conference and Health Education Institute, things like CADCA, the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America conference. So, having conversations about these professional organizations and attending these events where not only are you growing in your knowledge, your networking is absolutely huge. Prevention is a very small field. It seems big, it's not. Lots of the same faces at lots of the same places. We're always welcoming newcomers, but rubbing shoulders with people to share ideas is so important in prevention. Most of us, I will not speak for everyone, I especially am more of a let's not recreate the wheel, right? If I'm doing something that's effective and evidence-based and I can hand it off to you, that I'm absolutely going to share those resources. So networking, professional development, attending workshops, virtual sessions, and professional organizations is absolutely huge. SPECA, Statewide Prevention Coalitions of America, I will not speak in jargon for you new people, through Prevention Action Alliance, all of those networks are absolutely vital in your professional growth.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jamie. Christy, I want to hand it over to you.
Jamie said it perfectly. I fangirl Jamie. I think she's fantastic. I just, this field is built on relationships. A lot of us stay because we adore the people in this field so much. And mentoring and networking is part of that, right? I think particularly in the time of, this virtual world, find your people, find your group. Doesn't matter what part of the state they are, email them all the time, text them. I have this question. I'm not sure. What do you think of this? Right? That's professional development. That's growth. That's learning. So yeah, I think, and hopefully the relationships you grow as a part of the funding and this opportunity will allow you to grow that networking even more.
And take your business cards everywhere. Everywhere. Like, it sounds silly, but there are so many times, whether you're at a prevention conference or a training or something, but even out in the community, it may not be a professional, but it may be somebody that's knowledgeable in an area that has to do with prevention. Maybe you've met a counselor who's very knowledgeable in alcohol, right? Which we do alcohol prevention. So being able to be like, hey, can we connect sometime? I want to learn more about that. And just sharing those connections can take you farther than you'll ever realize.
Absolutely. Jamie, I appreciate that practical advice. I cannot tell you how many times I've been out in the community and I've been able to connect, with someone either, in the area I'm working on or in another areas. So thank you so much for holding that up. I'd like to spend a little time discussing those supervisors who hold that credential that can manage prevention professionals, but maybe don't have that direct experience with prevention. So how can the supervisors who hold the right credential but lack prevention experience be supported in their learning journey? Are there any specific examples from your work that you've seen be just meaningful and tried and true strategies?
Jamie, I defer to you first.
I think it goes back to that, trying to build that relationship with your supervisor and knowing, I don't use the term like manage up, but just really educating on, hey, you may have the right credential, but if you don't have that experience in prevention, and just sharing, right? Not, maybe not in a condescending way, but just like, hey, I was on a training today and I learned about XYZ. What are your thoughts on that? And just keeping it part of kind of casual conversation with them. It doesn't have to be at a supervisor meeting where you're sitting down and saying, no, that's not correct, or you have a misunderstanding with that, but trying to engage in that continuous dialogue that you have with them is important.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Christy, do you have any examples to share?
I think, sometimes we are super connected to the way we've always done things. And Jamie said it really well, just being open to continue to learn and to be flexible. And sometimes that means in those non-traditional ways, like Jamie said, right? Those conversations that aren't within your one-on-ones, or those conversations when we're not updating on projects. I'm lucky. I recently got to hire 4 straight out of college young people, and they teach me every day. But I will tell you, the number one thing that gets me excited is their excitement, right? So, when you're going to your supervisor, just bringing in that energy, it's contagious, right? Now I have one that's a cheerleader, so she's just naturally rah, 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 right? But I have one that's very quiet and very, 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 very introverted. And so when she comes and she's a little bit, she talks a little bit faster, right? I'm like, oh, I know she's really engaged in this. I want to know all about this, right? So yeah, just that excitement that, this is something that I think is going to mean a lot to us, and can we explore it? And did you know about this? And I think it's beneficial too, because a lot of us have the history of what we've been through, what we've done, what's worked and what hasn't worked, and why, right? Sometimes I think young people can thrown on and not know that history. So we can do that exchange, right? Like, oh yeah, that did happen. But maybe if we would have done it this way, it would have been more successful. So yeah, just open communication and excitement, and keeping those doors are always open.
And I would also, if you're looking at it from a supervisor situation, our supervisors are also focused not only on supervising us, but how are we meeting our funders' requirements? How are we meeting right? All of this criteria, how are we meeting our accreditation? How are we meeting, right? All of these things. So even framing it from that perspective is helpful. Like, hey, I was on this training, or I attended this, or I did this, and I learned about this really cool thing that they're doing. It's evidence-based or best practice, and we're focusing on Narcan distribution, or we're doing opiate prevention. Is there a way that we could fit this, right, doing this thing or trying to pilot this thing in with what we're doing? And then you're also sharing those new ideas and those innovative things, and you don't realize they don't know you're teaching them. Does that, like, but you're still trying to hit those requirements from our funders, because sometimes that's the whole thing, is like, yeah, this is great, but how are we going to fit this in to whatever our funding streams currently are and what they're asking for us? So the more you can kind of shift it from that perspective too, I think that's helpful.
Absolutely. And I appreciate some of the themes that you guys have brought up, like the passion that we have in prevention. This is a very engaging sort of work where we're not just, typically running through slides and reading off slides. People in prevention tend to be very passionate, very excited about this work. So sharing that with your supervisor definitely to build that rapport and build that relationship. And Jamie, I appreciate you bringing up, recognizing the needs of our supervisors. So their day-to-day workflow often includes making sure we're hitting those target goals, making sure we are meeting the funders' needs. And sometimes, within that role, we don't always have time to sit down and say, "Now, what exactly did my staff, learn today?" But rather, saying, as an employee, I can come to that person managing me and share that information rather than make them seek it out of me and ask those questions. I appreciate how those two ideas aligned. For those of you who have attended a prevention exchange before, you know that we typically go into breakout rooms and we have some discussion. And this is about the time in our agenda where we would start breaking off and having those discussions. Today, we decided to have more of a discussion as a large group, just because the idea of sharing themes, sharing our experience within prevention is really meaningful. And we would hate for you to miss the experience of one of your colleagues on this call because we chose to split you guys up. So we'd love to hear about from the folks in the room. Does the experience shared today align with your own in prevention? Have you heard echoes of your own story within prevention today? And is there anything you'd like to add? Or perhaps some advice for someone newer in the field? While folks are collecting their thoughts, in case you don't have the chat open, I do see a comment from Bobby. Thank you so much for sharing that. We can also learn more about our supervisor's scope of practice as a social worker, for example, and capitalize on their strengths-based approaches, the socio-ecological systems approaches, et cetera, that apply to our work. Absolutely, Bobby. Thank you for holding that up. Knowing our audience, knowing who we're connecting with is extremely important.
I'd just like to give a
That's
shout
out.
out to OCAM for all the work that they've done in developing trainings and support for people who are trying to get their credentials. I think in my experience, at the beginning, it was hard to find the foundations classes. It was difficult to get to them. There was often a cost involved. There are a lot of barriers to, getting started on credentialing, and even more so when it came to the OTPC. And thanks to the work that OMAS and OCAM have done, many of those barriers are coming down. And I put in the chat before the information about the work being done looking at supervising. But we're on the prevention committee at the board. We're also looking at really defining better what the content of that core knowledge for any prevention professional is, and ways to obtain it. So I think that the difficulties have led to some really important changes in how prevention is supporting professional development.
Absolutely. And thank you, Barbara, for sharing that. I do see.
I was just going to say real quick, Tessa, I was new to prevention 3 years ago. And I fell in love with the field, probably thanks to, my boss, Wendy. And then between Christy and Jennifer and just taking their trainings, and it's a really eye-opening. I still always have a ton of questions. But I'm very thankful for the field and for what the trainings that OCAM has offered to help, just someone that's completely new to the field. I have a criminal justice background, did not come this way through college or anything like that. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, absolutely. And I can see myself in that experience of just falling in love with the field and, having that meaningful mentor. It can really make such a difference in our entry to the field. I do see one comment from the chat. My experience that have been very similar to what's shared, especially with supervisors who do not understand prevention or know what the field is. Yeah, absolutely. Like sometimes we do have the opportunity to educate and share more insight into what prevention actually is and get a deeper understanding. And then I do see one comment from Pamela. Oh, great. Pamela's daughter is a sophomore in college majoring in psychology. That's exciting. And she's interested in the clinical role. I started in prevention and feel this has been my key in clinical work, but I haven't been directly involved in the field of prevention currently. She does have a question. How would I encourage my daughter to try to get this experience that can make her better as the clinician later? Christy and Jamie, do you have any insight?
So I would just talk about prevention, and I know I have kind of talked about that career ladder or the career pathway for prevention. I have dropped that in the chat for anybody that is interested in looking at that. It does talk about the pathway to prevention. Let me see. I'm going to share it. Can everyone see that on their screen? Yes, no, maybe.
Yes,
Okay.
I can see it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So and you can save this, you can share this as much as you want. This will also be on the Prevention Center of Excellence website, but it talks about community members and how they provide prevention. We look at how everyone has a role in prevention and kind of the basics of the certification in the process. So this could be a good way to start, just letting her know, yeah, as you do this, career choice, this is how you can involve prevention in that. And this is how you do prevention, whether you realize it or not, you are doing it. And this is kind of so you can get a little more knowledgeable in this area.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Jamie. And I appreciate that. That resource is available in the chat and we will link it under the recording as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your insight into supervision. We did touch earlier on the idea of management and growth. So we were talking about developing those relationships with managers. Oh, I'm so sorry. Ashley has her hand up.
I was just going to add that, as a supervisor, one of the things when you're bringing in staff, then this kind of circles back to, if somebody interviews for a position that you have open to be a prevention coordinator and has a CHES or an LSW, they meet the qualifications, but it goes back to scope. And I think that that's where the power really holds and really and that's something we do internally where I'm at. When we're hiring, we're very specific in our interview questions to really identify scope of practice and what's your background, to make sure that they understand. And then we encourage those, if we were to hire that LSW or to hire that CHES, we say, well, you can practice, you meet the requirements to be a prevention coordinator. We want your CEUs to be prevention specific, as you're here now practicing in prevention. And as your supervisor, if you would like to advance your scope so that others are aware that you specialize in prevention, we highly encourage you to get the credential. And that's why I ended up getting my OCPC because I had my LISWS, but I got my OCPC because I got sick and tired of explaining to people that I wasn't mental health based. I could do mental health prevention, but I wasn't a clinician. I get asked all the time where I work to do crisis mitigation and crisis, stuff. And it's like, okay, but that's not my scope of practice. Just because I have an LISWS doesn't mean that that's my scope. If I had a client who came in with schizophrenia, I wouldn't know what to do with it because I'm a preventionist. So that's why I actually went and got my OCPC, because I wanted to be able to differentiate and show that that was my, essentially my expertise. And that's kind of, as we have a position that we're about to hire that's kind of my counterpart in another part of our department. And I keep pushing back to my supervisor, who is more clinical experience as opposed to prevention experience. So like I'm always having those conversations with him in supervision. Like, this is, yes, you can sign off on a credential, but this is the things you need to look for when you're signing off for this individual. These are the trainings you need to look for. This is, how the practice works. These are the meetings that you should be in. And one of the things that I'm really helping him to understand is, when we're looking at hiring this person, making sure that if they don't have an OCPS or an OCPC and they can supervise, they have to have the knowledge and understanding of what prevention is, because they're not going to be able to supervise their staff who are doing prevention work if they don't understand the science and the work behind it. So it's just kind of goes into, I think, the power that we hold with all of the diverse fields when we see how much diversity works in prevention, and when we're hiring individuals, is really asking and looking at somebody's resume. What is your background? What's your experience? How have you facilitated environmental strategies? What evidence-based programs or curriculums have you utilized, and why? How have you adapted fidelity? All of those key, what populations have you worked with? Have you been on any coalitions? That helps us understand a well-framed individual that we can then bring into staff. And the last thing I'll say, and Christy knows this about me, is that I like to talk to, what up, Christy? Miss you. Is I think that we also get so focused and bogged down with this idea of somebody coming out of college. And we lose sight of the power that we have as preventionists to mentor transitional age youth from our programming into our field. And that is something that we're doing at my agency. And I'm happy to say that one of our 8th grade students was just hired full-time as our newest prevention coordinator. He's 21 years old and he is his OCPSA. And we helped him get that. And there's no better person to come back into the field than somebody who came out of it. And I think one of the panelists had said that they were also a prevention participant prior to. That's how we can further the field. That's how we can really create change and growth, and kind of helping understand those pathways that they can have within those college courses, or if they wanted to get their associate's degree or their bachelor's degree. It's not in prevention. Christy and I have the same crusade. We're both fighting for that. But saying, okay, well, these are areas that look at prevention topics. If you want to go through this, we can help you look at this. So now I'll stop talking, but just as somebody who supervises programming and works with this, I just wanted to say that's how we have been doing it, and how it's creating change.
Ashley, I thank you for sharing that. I want to real quickly build off of that. What Ashley said is super important. We have to start letting younger people know that this is a field, that this is a career, that this is a possibility for them. And I'm thankful for the OCAM funding and the opportunity to do this because we will have over the summer the ability to fund high school internships, to pay high school students to do this work. There's a limited amount, right? We're going to have a process where you apply, and we've seen some success on a smaller level, in Akron, in here in the Cincinnati area. This is the first step in, building our workforce into helping young people understand. I think all of us probably have a story that we just kind of stumbled into this field. So really, think about how you can engage young people in the social. I heard all of you guys talk about social media work, and the work that we're doing when we're working with young people, maybe thinking about peer-to-peer, but also in, teaching it and helping us too, and to broaden our perspectives in the work that we're doing. So yes, absolutely. The more we can bring new faces into the field, the stronger our work will be and the stronger we will be.
Absolutely. And thank you both for uplifting those themes. And I love the idea of, not everyone has to go to college to do this work. We don't need to wait for folks to finish that degree. We can, really work with people out of high school. And you're right, Christy, we do need to do some of that work to, communicate this is a career option. This is a career path, So I'm so appreciative of that. We are on the last section of our agenda today. We really appreciate you sharing your insight into supervision. And throughout this conversation, we've touched on the idea of management and growth. So as I think of growth, you both have excellent views on how to foster professional growth, like this idea of seeking out opportunities, building those relationships, finding that mentor and connecting with them in a meaningful way. What do you feel is either an opportunity or possibly a barrier to professional growth within prevention? I know, Christy, you have talked about the idea of choose your own adventure being a bit of a double-edged sword. So I'd love to hear you expand upon that.
I think when I first started in the field, it was presented as you work at a direct service agency, you do your direct service, you move up to maybe manager, and then maybe you run it, right? And while I am lucky to have been offered those opportunities, I still see our field as so much more than that, right? Like Jamie said, you take prevention into every sector and it makes you more marketable, right? We're working with the nursing students down here at the University of Cincinnati, and we're talking about how prevention fits so wonderfully with their career goals and how it makes them more marketable, right? I am going to be sitting down with a room full of other individuals that want to fill these job applicants. But I have this prevention credential that I bring that not a lot of other individuals can, right? You can choose the work that you're doing, the passion that you have, and you can map that out, right? You can work within a school sector without delivering school direct service, right? And talking about policy and professional development and navigating school board meetings, right? And talking about data and evidence-based strategies. You can work within a faith-based organization and run a prevention ministry, right? In your business, you can talk about how drug-free workplace increases the outputs, decreases the amount of tardiness, right? Fosters engagement. You can walk this into any sector. You can take this, you can build your brand of prevention and run it really anywhere. And I think we've seen a lot of really successful people do it in the state of Ohio. They thought about it, they were innovative, they were creative, and they said, I don't think I want to work for an organization, but I want to work in prevention and I'm going to make it look like this. And they went out and they did it. So I think you can really connect with what you like, what drives you in the field of prevention, and grow that into whatever you want it to look like within the scope of practice and within the research of the science. Jamie, I hand it off to you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Right. There's so many different pieces of prevention, even just within those 6 CSAP strategies, right? Environmental looks very different. What level are you trying to change? Are you looking at a systems change in an agency or a school district at the local level, state level, federal level, right? There's direct service, all continuum across the lifespan. So there's so much that goes into it. Absolutely, find your niche, find what you love. I will tell you, I do some policy work right now. I would rather be in a classroom with kids talking about vaping and doing youth led. And there are so many people that are like, please, for the love, do not make me talk in front of 13-year-olds. It gives me anxiety. I'm like, give me 500 of them. I love it. Right? Find what you love and go for it. But you also, with that, have to know that prevention is a field of lifelong learning. This is a field where you have to, know your data, don't marry it. It changes as you do different assessments and prevention science changes. But if you cannot be in this field and say, this is exactly how I'm going to do prevention for the rest of my life. and not be willing to grow, change, and adapt. You have to be willing to say, oh, let's try something new. Let's innovate. Let's change this up, right? Zoom and prevention over COVID, right? You can't be like, I don't like technology. I, and then get thrown into a situation like that. Lifelong learning is huge. Asking those supervisors, ask those people, hey, there's this workshop or this conference or this event. Can I go? Can I learn? Can I, and rub shoulders. I cannot stress this enough. Rub shoulders with other prevention people. Find mentors who you can have these conversations with that can help you either handle tough situations or bounce new ideas off of. But have a willingness to learn. That's really the only way you're going to be successful in this field.
Absolutely. Yes. Continued and lifelong learning is the key to success in our field. And I just want to hold up, Ashley did share in the chat that she has a 72-year-old staff member about to take his OCPS test. So that's exciting. That's absolutely wonderful. And what a wonderful person to add to the certified prevention field. Yes.
I wore him down.
That's amazing. Well, I want to thank our panelists. We have a few minutes left in our time that we have scheduled to spend together today. As we think of our paths into prevention, what opportunities for growth have we missed? Is there anything else we want to uplift during our time together? All right. Well, on that note, I really want to thank you all for choosing to spend your time with us today. I know that we have covered a lot of ground, and this is going to be a continued conversation. This is such rich discussion. Thank you for bringing, your openness to this conversation, your willingness to share your own experience and your own examples. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to hand this back to Jen for some closing remarks and a reminder of our evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tessa. So absolutely, we appreciate you spending the last 56 minutes with us. I hope that you have found something helpful in the conversation and you've gotten out of it what you hoped that you might when you join this meeting. We recognize as we're prepping for this panel that this conversation could take us about anywhere. So if there's something that you did not get out of it, or you were hoping that we touched on or would spend a little more time touching on, please send us a note, send us an email. We are honestly envisioning this to become more of a series of, especially as we talk about our own personal and professional development. We'd love to hear more from you about what you would like to hear. And that being said, Prevention Exchange is a monthly series. Here at the Center of Excellence, we typically theme our communications and our modes of engaging with Ohio's prevention workforce every month. So February's theme will be the role of prevention in advancing health equity and justice. So by registering for today, you automatically have the next several months of Prevention Exchange on your calendar. So we hope you'll be able to join us. We'll be sharing information about our speakers very soon. But at the center, we typically communicate via a monthly newsletter. We have social media channels, this Prevention Exchange, and we are just getting ready to launch our new podcast series too. So if you have an idea, if you have a speaker in general, as it relates to any facet of prevention, we want to hear from you. The center is here to serve and support Ohio's workforce. So please don't be a stranger. It's been really lovely to see so many of you on today. And with that, we'll go ahead and end today's session and wish you all a very lovely afternoon. Take care, everybody.